Have you ever found yourself lost in books, endlessly studying philosophy or spirituality, yet still feeling an emptiness inside? Maybe you know the teachings, the concepts, and the ideas, but something feels missing. You wonder why all that knowledge hasn't transformed your life the way you imagined. You're not alone. Many seekers, especially those drawn to Buddhism, begin their journey by diving deep into texts and lectures. They learn about karma, impermanence, and mindfulness. They study the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. But somewhere along the way, a subtle frustration can creep in. The teachings remain intellectual, distant, like stars shining far away, beautiful but unreachable. The peace and freedom they long for seem just beyond their grasp. This is where meditation steps in, not as an optional add-on or a nice extra, but as the essential bridge between theory and reality. Imagine for a moment the story of the blind men and the elephant, a timeless parable that perfectly captures this dilemma. Each blind man touches a different part of the elephant's body. One feels the trunk, another the leg, another the tail. Each describes the elephant based on their limited experience. One insists the elephant is like a snake, another argues it's like a tree trunk. None of them sees the whole picture because their understanding is based only on a small fragment. In the same way, studying Buddhist philosophy alone can give you pieces of the truth, valuable pieces to be sure, but it doesn't reveal the whole elephant. Without meditation, these teachings risk remaining fragmented, like puzzle pieces scattered across the floor. Meditation is what allows you to touch the elephant with your whole being. It brings the teachings from abstract concepts into lived experience. It turns intellectual knowledge into wisdom that shapes how you see the world, how you relate to yourself, and how you respond to life's challenges. The Buddha himself didn't encourage his followers to merely memorize sutras or debate doctrine. He taught meditation as the direct path to awakening. The wisdom that transforms suffering isn't just something to read about. It's something to be realized. And this realization comes through practice, through sitting quietly, observing the breath, watching thoughts arise and pass away, feeling the currents of emotions, and recognizing the impermanent nature of everything. It's a profound, first-hand encounter with reality that no amount of reading can replace. So, if you've ever wondered why so many meditators say practice, not just theory, this is why. Meditation is the living heart of the path, the key that unlocks the door beyond intellectual understanding. Over the next few chapters, we'll explore how meditation deepens insight, reshapes the mind, and creates lasting transformation. We'll look at how the Buddha framed the balance between study and practice, and why modern seekers need to embrace both to walk the path fully. But for now, hold on to this thought. Wisdom is not just knowing. Wisdom is being, and being in the truest sense unfolds through meditation. It's easy to think that if we just read enough, learn enough, or understand enough, peace and clarity will naturally follow. After all, knowledge is power, right? But when it comes to the path of awakening, there's a crucial difference between knowing about something and knowing something deeply, at the very core of your being. Books, lectures, and teachings are invaluable. They lay the groundwork, provide context, and open our minds to new ways of seeing the world. Yet, intellectual understanding remains confined to the mind, a map, not the territory itself. Imagine holding a photograph of a mountain. The image may be stunning, detailed even, but no matter how much you stare at it, the photo will never offer the fresh air, the feel of the rocks beneath your feet, or the vastness of the landscape stretching out before you. Knowledge alone is like that photo. It can guide, inspire, but it cannot substitute for the direct experience. In Buddhist terms, this intellectual approach is known as pariyatti, the study of the teachings. It is the first step, and an essential one, but it is not the destination. Without moving beyond theory, a student of Buddhism risks falling into what some call spiritual materialism, accumulating facts, concepts, and ideas as if they were trophies, mistaking knowing for being. This is a subtle trap because it feels like progress. After all, you're learning so much. But underneath the surface, the habitual patterns of the mind, craving, aversion, confusion, remain untouched. This is why so many people come to Buddhist study with high hopes, only to find that their inner turmoil continues. The intellectual understanding has not penetrated the heart. The endless cycle of worry, frustration, and dissatisfaction goes on. Here's a profound insight. True wisdom is experiential. It cannot be fully captured by words or ideas. It emerges when the mind settles and awareness opens to what is, without judgment, without distortion. That's why the Buddha insisted on practice alongside study. He taught that reading and hearing the Dharma must be paired with meditative cultivation. Without this, teachings remain like seeds scattered on rocky soil, unable to take root and grow. In meditation, you move from simply hearing or thinking about impermanence to actually witnessing it. You don't just intellectually grasp suffering. You observe its arising and passing moment by moment inside yourself. This direct seeing leads to insight, the kind that transforms. So while knowledge is the spark, meditation is the fire. And without fire, the spark remains cold and lifeless. Understanding this distinction is the beginning of a deeper journey, a journey from the mind's chatter to the stillness beneath, from concepts to clarity, from knowing about the truth to truly living it. As we continue, we'll explore how meditation becomes this bridge, the vital link that transforms intellectual understanding into living wisdom. So we've seen how knowledge alone, no matter how vast, can leave us feeling stuck, disconnected from the true essence of the teachings. But what exactly happens when we shift from merely understanding ideas to experiencing them? Meditation is the doorway into this transformation. It's the path where wisdom stops being a distant concept and becomes a living, breathing reality within you. Imagine sitting quietly, focusing on your breath. At first, the mind is restless, flitting from thought to thought, caught in its habitual patterns. But with gentle patience, something remarkable begins to unfold. You start noticing the way thoughts arise and fade, like clouds drifting across a clear sky. This simple awareness is the foundation of experiential wisdom. Rather than just thinking about impermanence or suffering, you see them directly, moment by moment. You observe cravings bubbling up, anger simmering beneath the surface, and then quietly dissolving. You witness the constant flow of sensations, emotions, and mental states, all impermanent, all changing. Through meditation, the teachings become more than words. They become your personal discovery. Insight arises naturally, not from forcing the mind, but from letting it settle into clarity and presence. Buddhist scriptures highlight this again and again. The Buddha said, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." Meditation is where this personal verification happens. It's a science of the mind, an inner experiment where you test the teachings against your own experience. This is why meditation isn't about escaping the world or suppressing thoughts. It's about meeting reality head-on with openness and curiosity. It's about cultivating mindfulness, a clear, steady attention that reveals the truth beneath illusions. And as this clarity deepens, something profound shifts. The rigid boundaries between self and other begin to soften. The sense of separation dissolves into a spacious awareness that connects you to everything. This experiential wisdom doesn't just inform you, it transforms you. It helps you respond to life's challenges with calmness instead of reactivity, with compassion instead of judgment. In this way, meditation isn't merely a technique, it's a doorway to awakening. It's the heart of the Buddha's teaching, the direct path to freedom. And the good news, this path is open to everyone. No matter where you start, meditation invites you to step beyond theory and touch the truth yourself. As we move forward, we'll explore how this practice reshapes not only your understanding, but your very way of being, how it brings transformation that ripples through every aspect of life. Meditation is not just a momentary escape or a simple relaxation technique. It's a profound journey, a process that gradually reshapes your mind, your heart, and ultimately your entire life. At first, when you sit down to meditate, you may notice restlessness, distractions, even frustration. The mind rebels against stillness, pulling you back into familiar stories, worries, and habits. But here lies the subtle power of consistent practice. It invites you to meet these challenges with patience and curiosity, rather than resistance. Each time you return to your breath, you're training a muscle, the muscle of attention. With this training, something extraordinary happens. The habitual patterns that once controlled you begin to lose their grip. Anger no longer flares up instantly. Anxiety softens its edge. Cravings lose their urgency. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual, often invisible at first. But like a river carving through rock, persistence brings change. More than that, meditation helps uncover layers of self you may never have noticed. Beneath the chatter and noise lies a quieter, deeper presence, a space of calm and clarity. This is where true wisdom arises, not from intellectual concepts, but from direct experience. Many practitioners describe this as a shift from doing to being. It's a profound letting go of control, a surrender to what is, and paradoxically, in this surrender, there's immense freedom. Buddhism calls this transformation awakening, a movement beyond suffering into peace. It's the fruit of walking the path, not just reading about it. But transformation through practice isn't only about inner peace. It also touches how we relate to others. As meditation deepens, compassion naturally blooms. When we see the impermanent, interconnected nature of life, we soften judgments, open our hearts, and act with kindness. This is why meditation has been called a revolution of the heart. It's not a solitary journey, but one that ripples outward, changing the way we live and love in the world. So, as you develop your practice, remember, every moment on the cushion is a step toward this transformation. Every breath observed, every distraction noticed and returned from is a victory. It's not about perfection. It's about showing up again and again, willing to face whatever arises and allowing the process to unfold naturally. In this way, meditation becomes a mirror, reflecting your true nature. It reveals what's real beneath the layers of habit and illusion. And when you glimpse this truth, no matter how briefly, it changes everything. The journey continues, and in the next chapter, we'll dive deeper into how meditation and study complement each other, guiding us toward a fuller, richer understanding. When we look closely at the life and teachings of the Buddha, one message stands out with striking clarity. Understanding the Dharma through study is important, but it is practice, the direct application of those teachings, that truly leads to liberation. The Buddha wasn't merely a philosopher or a scholar. He was a practitioner, a meditator who discovered the path through his own first-hand experience. He spent years in deep meditation, wrestling with the nature of suffering and the mind's illusions, until he awakened to profound insight. And this is why, throughout his teachings, he urged his followers not to become attached to words or concepts. He invited them to test his teachings in their own experience, to see for themselves if the path led to freedom. Consider the famous Kalama Sutta, where the Buddha advises, "Do not go upon what has been acquired by repeated hearing, nor upon tradition, nor upon rumor, nor upon what is in a scripture, nor upon surmise, nor upon an axiom, nor upon specious reasoning, nor upon a bias towards a notion that has been pondered over, nor upon another's seeming ability, nor upon the consideration, the monk is our teacher. Kalamas, when you yourselves know. These things are good, these things are blameless, these things are praised by the wise, undertaken and observed, these things lead to welfare and happiness. Then accept them and live accordingly." This teaching highlights a revolutionary approach, encouraging personal verification, critical thinking, and above all, practice. The Buddha's emphasis on practice can be seen in his detailed instructions on meditation techniques, ethical conduct, and mental cultivation. He didn't ask followers to memorize or debate theories endlessly. Instead, he guided them to live the Dharma, moment by moment. This practical focus is crucial because true transformation happens in the field of experience, not in intellectualizing ideas. Moreover, by prioritizing practice, the Buddha addressed a fundamental human truth. Real change requires embodied experience. No matter how much theory we understand, if it does not move through our actions and lived reality, it remains abstract, powerless. Meditation is the cornerstone of this practice. Through it, the teachings cease to be distant doctrines and become your reality. Your suffering is seen clearly, your attachments gently released, your mind steadily calmed. The Buddha's own path demonstrates this perfectly. He did not awaken through study alone. It was through deep meditative insight, cultivated over years, that he touched enlightenment. So when we ask why practice matters more than theory, the answer lies in the Buddha's lived example and his clear instructions. Walk the path yourself. Let the Dharma become more than knowledge. Let it become life. As you continue your own journey, keep this teaching close. Practice is the bridge from knowing to being, from theory to awakening. Next, we'll explore the practical ways meditation weaves theory and experience together, creating a seamless path toward wisdom. There's a timeless parable that beautifully illustrates the danger of relying on theory without practice, the story of the blind men and the elephant. In this tale, several blind men each touch a different part of an elephant. One grabs the trunk and insists the elephant is like a snake. Another feels the leg and says it's like a tree trunk. Another holds the tail and claims it's like a rope. Each man's perception is true, yet incomplete. Because they have only partial knowledge, they misunderstand the whole elephant. This story echoes the challenge of intellectual understanding without direct experience. When we study Buddhist teachings or any spiritual philosophy purely as concepts, without bringing them into our own awareness and practice, we risk fragmenting the truth. We might grasp some teachings intellectually but miss their deeper essence. We might debate ideas endlessly, yet remain untouched by their liberating power. Without practice, theory remains abstract. Like the blind men, we only know a piece of the truth. The transformative wisdom of meditation is that it helps us see the whole elephant, the full reality beyond fragmented ideas. By turning inward and observing the mind and body directly, we uncover how suffering arises, how attachment holds us captive, and how freedom can unfold. This embodied knowledge goes beyond words. It is a lived reality. And it is this direct insight that dissolves confusion and brings clarity. In Buddhist practice, this means not only reading the sutras or listening to teachings, but embodying the Dharma in every breath, every moment of mindfulness. The elephant is vast, complex, and subtle, just like the mind and the path to awakening. Only by practicing meditation can we begin to experience its full shape, its true nature. Otherwise, we remain like the blind men, each convinced by partial truths, missing the richness and depth of the whole. So the parable reminds us, theory alone is not enough. Practice is essential to see beyond the surface and realize the complete truth. As you deepen your meditation, you are piecing together the elephant, moment by moment, until the full picture unfolds, not as an idea, but as direct, transformative experience. In our final chapter, we'll reflect on how this journey comes full circle, and why integrating theory and practice is the key to lasting wisdom and freedom. As we arrive at this moment of reflection, it becomes clear that the journey of understanding Buddhism, or any profound spiritual path, is not a simple choice between theory and practice. Rather, it is a delicate, essential weaving of both. Theory provides the map. It lays out the terrain, the directions, and the landmarks. It gives context and clarity to what might otherwise be a confusing wilderness. But practice is the walking. It's the direct experience of the path, the living, breathing engagement with each step, each breath, each moment of awareness. Without practice, theory remains a beautiful idea, an inspiring story. Without theory, practice can feel aimless, unfocused, and difficult to sustain. When integrated, theory and practice become inseparable companions, guiding us beyond intellectual understanding to awakening, a profound transformation that touches every part of our being. True awakening is not a distant goal, but a living reality that begins the moment we bring awareness to the present. Meditation bridges the gap. It transforms knowledge into wisdom, thought into insight, and potential into freedom. Through consistent practice, the teachings move from the page into the heart, dissolving suffering and revealing the radiant nature of mind. This integration is the core of the Buddha's message, a call to live the Dharma, not just know it. So whether you are a seeker just beginning or a seasoned practitioner, remember, every moment you dedicate to practice, every time you return to the breath, you are stepping closer to that true awakening. If this journey resonates with you, I invite you to join our growing community here on the channel. Share your experiences, questions, and insights in the comments below, because your voice matters. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay connected as we continue to explore the profound wisdom of Buddhism together. Thank you for being part of this path. May your practice bring you peace, clarity, and the deep freedom that lies within.